Man, I hope I never do to my kids what Deion Sanders did to Shedeur Sanders. I don't know if you've been watching this. By the way, this is Yuripzy Morgan. Welcome to Straight Talk with Yuripzy Morgan. And I don't know if you've been watching the NFL draft, but this is so much bigger than just football. So Shedeur Sanders is the son of Deion Sanders, right? Deion Sanders, prime time. I know him from his Dallas Cowboys days because that was my team. I remember sitting on the couch and watching the Cowboys play and sitting there with my dad. And my number one, my favorite jersey, the first jersey that I ever got was the Deion Sanders white Dallas Cowboy jersey. Once he retired, I even actually had it hanging up on my wall in the corner of my room. I loved him. I remember watching how good he was. I remember sitting on the couch with my dad, and there was one game in particular. I noticed that they weren't throwing to one side. The other team wasn't throwing to one side of the field. And I asked my dad why they weren't doing that. And he was like, because Deion Sanders is in the game. And if he's playing, then teams are less likely to throw to his side. That's how good he was. But he wasn't just a great player, he was super entertaining to watch. He was fun. He earned the nickname Primetime because that's what he did. He made everything very big and very showy. And keep in mind, I was like 9 and 10 at the time. So I was very easily entertained. So now, fast forward, right? He retires, has a bunch of kids. His son Shedeur played at an HBCU. Deion coached him there, and then they moved to Colorado, and that's when things got really crazy because Deion didn't just bring the team. He didn't. He brought Shedeur and I think one other player with him, but he brought the whole primetime personality. So I have not watched Colorado, I think, since I was probably like in the eighth grade. They just haven't been good for a long time. And then Dion comes in and he brings the whole, like the camera crew. And it's not just the crew, it is it's like you had to be there in the 90s, right? You had to be there when the Dallas Cowboys were on top and Deion Sanders was doing Deion Sanders things. He was almost like Dennis Rodman was for basketball, if you're not familiar with it, except without a lot of the bad boy persona. So, anyways, he comes to Colorado and there is this massive expectation that Dion is here. He is changing, the game for Colorado. And that first game he did. It was great. And the expectation just built, right? And then as the season progressed though, I remember I think it was maybe by the third game where they got blown out. I had to turn the TV off. I was like, I can't watch my childhood, NFL hero get blown out like this on national TV. It was really cringe. It was like secondhand embarrassment. So I turned it off. Anyway, so fast forward. Shedeur is now it was going to be in the draft. And the expectation around him was built up in that same way. And it was built up around the expectation that this kid was going to be a first round draft pick. And when I say as a parent, I had to turn the TV off again. I like put myself in the shoes of that kid. Imagine having this expectation set that, they specially built this massive room for their NFL draft party. They had, the hats, the football hat, the baseball caps. They had cameras everywhere. The room was filled with friends and supporters. All eyes were on him because they had built this up. And when I say they, I'm talking about like the Deion Sanders, Shedeur Sanders franchise. Like they have their own persona and they built this up so that when he didn't go in the first round, man, as a parent, I just wanted to hug that baby because I was like, I would never. I'm sorry, but it's good. If my kid was ever that good, I would still want them to be humble because I wouldn't want them to like be set up for that type of expectation. And to see him do that was just, I don't know, I felt really bad. Now, they've gone now through three rounds of the draft, and he still hasn't been picked up. And so the questions are flying. Oh, what is this? Is this another Colin Kaepernick situation where the league is just colluding to keep this young black guy from playing in the NFL? And I don't think so. I think it's two things. One, as I said, I think it's the way that Deion Sanders set him up, and a lot of parents. I think a lot of parents should be cautious. Now, we are not Deion Sanders, but I can tell you that even in my household, like I grew up, I would say East Texas poor. You know what I mean? And so where I am today is certainly not rich, nowhere near Deion Sanders. So let's just get that straight. but it is a long way from where I came from. And I have these concerns. I have these fears sometimes because my kids are growing up in such a vastly different way than I grew up. I am afraid that I am not going to instill that scrappiness in them because I know what it took to go from where I was to where I am today. And a lot of it was grit. It was being scrappy. It was being told no time and time again and getting up. I still remember one of my favorite lines was from the Rocky Balboa movie where he says, it's not about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. Well, that's how I feel like me and a lot of my friends, my group of generation, right, grew up because we were told no over and over again. That expectation for greatness was like a dream, but it was not set up for us. When it comes to somebody like Shedeur Sanders, and you see the way that his father has, you can almost see like the prime time, and I mean the 90s persona prime time expectation, the like the arrogance, right? The you deserve this. This is something that you are entitled to. I think really strips a lot of kids of that scrappiness, of that humility that is needed to succeed. And we've seen this in NFL, in basketball. We've seen this with other folks. But like I said, as a parent, for me, man, I'm like watching this kid and my heart breaks for him because of the expectation that has been set by his father, I think. And that hurts as a 90s kid who loved Deion Sanders primetime. But there's another aspect to this as well. And Rand Carthen, who was a former running back, former GM for the Titans, he had this to say about it.
Frank, and I'll be honest, you cannot convince me that Shedeur is the sixth best quarterback in this class.
And I'm not arguing with you.
And no one can convince me of that. I think there's a bigger conversation that needs to be had as to the why. Is it being held? We heard our own Jonathan Jones talk about the NIL era and who his father is, and I don't understand why we're holding that. If that's what's being held against him, why we're holding that against this kid. All right, let's just say he has a maturity issue. Let's just say he does. He has not done anything criminal and done anything that would put an organization in a bad light. So for me, I'm struggling with this right now because it does not make sense to me.
Makes sense to me, though. Now, here's what I think. Yes, okay, so he's right in the sense that that Shedeur is not bringing the type of baggage that you might expect NFL teams to look at and say, I'm not dealing with that. But I mean, that's not really true because, again, I'm a Cowboys fan. So I remember when Jerry Jones hired Pac-Man. Remember Pac-Man back in his like Pac-Man days, not before he started going by his first name, but when the criminal activity was going good. NFL teams will put up with a lot if you bring a lot to the table, right? If you are willing to work, if you are coachable. And this is a life lesson too. This is not just about the NFL. When it comes to Shedeur, he is a good quarterback, all right? He is a solid 7. He is not a solid 10. And some of that is going to, let's like, you got to have some humility about this, right? When you are in that position where you have a lot of talent and you are a good quarterback, you have to be coachable. And like I said, this is not just about football. This is a life lesson. And this is something that I tell my kids too. Like, you are talented. Yes. You are smart. You have to be willing to put in the work. You have to listen to your coaches, to your teachers. You have to take criticism and learn from it. Shedeur has shown from his interviews, from his personality, and yes, definitely from his dad, that that is not something that he is willing to do. When the combine, at this year at the combine, we chose not to work out. And then after the interviews, which by the way says a lot, like you don't even want to work out at the combine. Okay. And then he did these interviews and reports came out afterwards that when he was doing these interviews with these teams that they thought he was arrogant, unprofessional, that he didn't seem like he was willing to work with the team. Never mind football. If you are hiring somebody, if you're a business owner, you're hiring somebody or you're just the hiring manager and you're being told, hey, you need to hire some candidates. And then somebody walks in and they're like, hey, I don't exactly know everything that goes on in your business, but I want to learn. I'm going to be here on time. Like, teach me, show me what I need to do, and I will be a great employee for you. That person is going to get hired 9 times out of 10 over the person who walks in and says, I know everything. Where's my office? Who's my secretary? Do I get my own private line? Come again? And that's what Shedeur did. I think he walked into these interviews with this expectation that he was entitled to something that he hadn't earned yet. But that is not to take away from the fact that he is a good quarterback. He is just not NFL great yet. And a lot of that has to do with the coachability. And that's what I'm saying. It's not so much that he brought just baggage in general, right? Like, no, I don't think this kid has a criminal record, and that's great. But here's the other thing, too, about the NFL. He is a quarterback. Shedeur is a quarterback, and different positions have different expectations. For a quarterback, you want somebody who is going to be a leader, somebody who is going to work with his teammates, right? Somebody who is coachable, again. And that is not, I think, the personality that he brought to the table. So watching this kid go through this NFL draft process, both as a, like the 9-year-old former Cowboys fan in me is just, ugh, heartbroken. But the parent in me, oh my gosh, I'm like rethinking. I never want to set my kids up, not just physically, with literal cameras in their faces, watching them go through this. That just kills me as a parent. But I think it also has me rethinking, making sure that what I say and what I do and the expectations that I set for my kids are earned, right? As opposed to just expected because, hey, you're growing up in a nice area, in a nice home, surrounded by other kids in a nice area. Like, you still have to earn everything, okay? And humility goes a really long way. I'm in the car a lot, and to keep from being bored, I just listen to stuff on iTunes and Spotify. And now you can catch this show. You can subscribe to Straight Talk with Yuripzy Morgan on YouTube at Y Morgan Show, but you can also find us on iTunes and Spotify.
On May 5th, the Department of Education will resume involuntary collections for borrowers with defaulted federal student loans. Debt cannot be wiped away. It just ends up getting transferred to others. So why should Americans who didn't go to college or went to college and responsibly paid back their loans pay for the student loans of other Americans?
Okay, so that was Caroline Leavitt. That was the White House press secretary talking about the Trump administration's new plan to get their money back. Student loans were not free, it was a loan. So I have a date circled on my calendar. It's June 3rd of 2026. That will be my last federal student loan payment. And when I tell you, I mean, it has been a long, hard 10 years. It's been like 12 years since I graduated and started paying off these blasted student loans. But by the grace of God, they are almost paid off. Now, I am listening to Caroline Leavitt, and then I get on TikTok and Twitter and stuff, and I'm seeing a whole lot of people crash out about the fact that these student loans are getting called due. What did you think was going to happen? Now, listen, I know that there's a lot of people to blame, right? There's the federal government for setting up students in the first place. And you're absolutely right. There is no reason that 18-year-olds should just be given all of this money without some sort of boundaries. Now, the rational response to that would be, yeah, but if we put up boundaries, then you would have people complaining that not everyone had an opportunity to go to college, right? So all of a sudden your credit score comes into fact. Yes, and it should in a sense, right? And I do think that they should be a little bit more lax if we're talking about student loans, but there should be some boundaries. For example, if you are 18 years old and you are walking into a college, campus and you need help paying for loans, for school, that was me. Right? My parents gave me $200 and a pat on the back. Like, good luck, And okay, so I needed help paying for school. Well, in those situations, I do think that there is a role for, things like student loans and grants and scholarships and things like that. But like I said, not everybody's going to qualify for a scholarship. So there is a place for loans. But under no circumstances should colleges and universities allow some 18-year-old kid to walk in, declare a major, and not ask the most important question that we should have all asked, which is, what is your expected income for the major that you are trying to get? Because here's the thing, getting a job is about making money. Getting a degree is about helping you get that job. And so if you are going to college and you're going to spend, let's say, $60,000 on a job that's going to pay you $50,000, you messed up. And that is a question that we should have asked from the beginning. And we didn't ask that. And neither did the colleges or universities. They just said, you sign here, I'll sign here, and here is the check. Without ever asking, is this something you can pay back? If you've ever bought a house or a car, they're going to ask you, if you've ever applied for a credit card, they're going to ask you, how much money do you make? Because they want to know, can they get paid back? They didn't ask that question when it came to student loans, which is why I think that part of this should include lowering the interest rate for student loans. But we'll get into that later. Right now, I want to focus on particularly the role of my fellow former students. Why on God's green earth are you surprised that you have to pay this back? It is not a grant. It was not a gift. Nobody told you, I got you. Don't worry about it. This was always a loan. And I get it. I was there at 18 years old signing. I could have given away my firstborn. I had no idea really what I was doing, but I did know that a loan was something you paid back. So this should have always been an expectation. And I get that Joe Biden was out here telling folks just a few years ago, oh, student loan forgiveness. But here's my thing. If you are in this position, you have student loans, means you went to college, means you got a head on your shoulders here. We have to start asking better questions. There was never going to be student loan forgiveness because Joe Biden never had the power to forgive student loans. As a matter of fact, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, former Speaker of the House, actually said this in a press conference that Joe Biden does not have the power. No president has the power to forgive student loans.
That the President of the United States, is this more on the subject than you ever want to know? Will you let me know? People think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress.
Where where did we go wrong in our education system that separation of powers, y'all remember? He never had. And notice what she said there. She said the president. It wasn't just Joe Biden. That means Joe Biden, the president, Donald Trump, the president, Barack Obama, the president. None of these folks have the authority to forgive student loans. So that idea was a lie. It was a flat out lie, and too many Americans fell for it. Although I have a sneaking suspicion that more Americans knew that, and they were just hoping that there was going to be some loophole that would allow them to forgive their student loans. But here's also what irks me about this conversation. Even though student loans have now, you've got to start paying them back. There was a good amount, what was it, almost 2 years, I think, where you were able to pay student loans without interest. So I've heard there was the interest, they stopped interest rate for a while. And it was actually, they deferred payments so that you didn't have to pay. But if you did pay, it would come off the principal. And I'll be honest with you, I took full advantage of that. Because as somebody who, if you get a credit card, it says on your credit card bill, if you only pay the minimum balance, it's going to take you an entire lifetime to pay it back. All right. You're never going to be done with this credit card. If you make more than the minimum payment, though, this is how much it's going to take. So I'm seeing all of these TikToks about people saying I've been paying for 10 years and now I owe double what I originally took out. All right, how much were you paying though? Was it just the minimum balance? Because if the interest rate was above that, then yes, you're going to continue to accumulate. And that's not something that should have been a surprise 10 years down the road. I hope you didn't just look at your student loan payment or your student loan bill 10 years after you've been making minimum payments and just now realize that. Because come on, we're adults. You got to do better than this. But this is what really gets me too. We have this whole conversation about student loan forgiveness and who owes what. And the reality is it's the borrower. You're the one who owes the money. But here's the conversation that we're not having. We as a society, I think, really messed up when we started telling students, and we continue to tell students, that your job is going to do something that you love and that your job is going to make you happy. That's not the case. I hate to burst your bubble. That's not to say that you shouldn't do something that makes you happy. If you can find something that makes you happy, then do that for a living and make money. That's fantastic. But understand that the majority of your job is going to be about bringing home the bacon, about making money. And the reason for that is because we live in a society where you have to have money in order to do things. And you have to adjust your expectation. So for me, my dream job, I'm an attorney, but my dream job would be to go work in the Smithsonian. I would love nothing more than to go work in the Smithsonian or another museum where all I had to do was give tours and explain like the Constitution or American history. I would kill at that job. I would also not make money. I'd be broke. And I decided a long time ago that I wanted to make money. I like being comfortable, and therefore I had to make adjustments. Right? I may not love everything about what I do, but I like it enough. and I like the lifestyle that it affords me, I really like having my bills on auto pay. As somebody who grew up broke, I love that. The peace of mind that I like when my kid's school emails me and they say, "Oh, lunch account balance is low." I'm like, "Let me put $20 on that because I can." Couldn't do that when I was younger, right? It was not a possibility. And so I had certain expectations for what I wanted, and I had to match that up with the degree that I wanted. We have too many folks who are going to college that don't ask the question before they take out tens of $1,000s in student loan, how much money am I going to make if I get this degree and go get a job? That is such a basic question that we are missing. And because of that, we have a situation where a whole lot of people got degrees in things that now they can't afford based on the jobs they got with those degrees. We should have asked that question in the beginning. I remember in college, I think I was in a microbiology class, and randomly the teacher was talking about her day I think she did like water testing. And she was talking to us about the expectation of getting a biology degree and what you would make. And it was something around $45,000. And I remember putting down my pen and being like, come again? What? Like, I'm doing all this work. Now, granted, that was like 15 years ago, but I was like, I'm doing all this work. And I don't think that's where I expected to be. Not long after that, I decided I was going to go to law school because I was like, that's not the bracket that I want to be in. If, however, you decide you want to go to college, you want to get a liberal arts degree, you want to get a history degree, and you want to go work at the Smithsonian, or you want to go do something that you really, really love, okay, take that expectation and lower it with the income. All right. You got to know what you are going to make with what you're going to spend. And if they don't match up, you're going to have to make an adjustment. The world's not going to do it for you. And so the surprise that so many people have now that, we walked out of college with degrees that were not going to give us the lifestyle that we wanted. Okay, well, how are we going to fix that? But the obligation still exists that you took out this student loan, you have to pay it back. And unfortunately, I've seen so many people of my generation and particularly younger. I am a little bit of an elder millennial, I suppose. Although, no, I was mid 80s, so millennial. But I've seen particularly this younger generation that has this hyper focus on being happy. And look, that's a great thing, but understand that the goal of life is not to always make you happy, and certainly not for society. And sometimes you're going to have to do things. You're going to have to do jobs. You're going to be in careers or things like that may not bring you joy every day. But when did we start making joy the epitome of our existence? It's not. I tell my kids this all the time. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, and you're going to have most of the time days that are just days, okay? Sometimes you're going to be bored. Sometimes things are not going to be exciting. Actually, usually things aren't going to be exciting. That's how life works. That is the real world. But when we're sending these kids off to college with this expectation that they're just going to be happy all the time, do what makes you happy. Okay. Well, if you want to do what makes you happy, that's fine, but don't expect other people to pay for it. If you're enjoying the show, make sure that you subscribe to Straight Talk with Yuripzy Morgan on YouTube at Why Morgan Show. Also, you can find us on iTunes and Spotify. One thing I'll say about the Trump administration is there is never a dull moment. He has this big new idea, and this one is centered around babies.
The administration is considering proposals to encourage more American women to get married and have babies. The incentives would potentially include giving $5,000 in cash to American mothers after delivery and funding programs to educate women on their menstrual cycles. The administration officials have publicly promoted the pro-natalist movement on several occasions.
That's interesting. So, couple thoughts on that. One is, so his idea is to encourage more babies. And here's the background on that. I know a lot of people think that there are too many people in the world. In reality, in America, we have this serious population decline that several decades from now could be potentially pretty devastating. So a lot of our social services, things like Medicare, Social Security, are built around the younger population working and providing the funds for the older population to be able to use. And so it's a big cycle like that. Well, that's a problem if we went from having 4 or 5 kids in a household to 1 to 2 kids. I think the average now is about 2 kids per household in America, which is not great news from a tax perspective, if you're looking to build your tax base, well, people are having less babies. If you're looking to fund things like Social Security, people are having less babies, which means you're going to have less people working. And that could potentially be a significant problem. And so apparently the Trump administration is now looking for ways to incentivize families to have more babies. Will $5,000 do the trick? Hang on one second before we get to the money, because I, you know, here's the thing about Donald Trump. I always knew he wasn't really a Republican. And he's not. And I'm not, you can be mad at me if you want to, but he's really not a Republican. He is a businessman who ran as a Republican. And he has shown that time and time again, especially with proposals like this. Last year in Baltimore City, for example, there was a proposal, a baby bonus fund. It was $1,000, I believe, and it was going to be to every new parent, every new mom. It ended up not being on the ballot in Maryland because of a technicality, but still, it was seen as a very progressive, very liberal policy. And it is, to be honest. It's the type of policy that you would expect from somebody like AOC or Bernie Sanders, it's a very progressive type of policy. And yet, the conservative Trump administration is talking about sending $5,000 checks to every new mom. We're not even, and it would have to be something along the lines of you really couldn't restrict it based on income. You're trying to encourage people to have babies. So it becomes a very progressive policy. But like I said, Donald Trump he's not really a Republican. He's a businessman who is motivated not by politics, not by necessarily the Republican principles. He is motivated by two things: money and power. And in this case, more babies equals more taxpayers, which equals more money. So, and being able to pull this off would be more power. So I think that's how he would get around it. But here's the thing, though. Would you think it would actually motivate women to have babies? I don't know. Because, see, I'm thinking about this from my own perspective. I have two kids, two little girls. Now, I wanted to have more kids. My husband was like, no, he was done. And my husband was super, super helpful. He's, from that newer generation of dads that changed more diapers than I can count. As soon as he got home from work, I could give him the baby. He's with the kids now while I'm recording this. Like, he is a very, very active, hands-on dad. If I need the dishes done, he's like, oh, right, I'll go do the dishes. And, so he's very active. It's not so much in my case that I needed more help. It is a cost factor. The amount of money that it costs to raise a child in America now, especially in the area where I live in Maryland, it is really, really expensive. Now, back in the day when I was growing up, I'm the oldest of five, but times were very different. My mom stayed home, even though she was she had a degree, but she stayed home. But the rules were very different. We lived out in the middle of nowhere, East Texas. There were cow pastures on all sides, and we had one big rule in the house. If you were in the house, you were cleaning. All right, so that means that we were outside a lot, playing and doing whatever. But that also meant that my mom was not. She wasn't as, and my mom was a great mom. Don't get me wrong. Like, I love my mom, but she wasn't a helicopter mom. There was a lot of, you're on your own, kid, figure it out. I remember telling her that I wanted to play sports, and she would let me play whatever sports that I wanted to. Trick was I had to get myself home. So she had four other babies at home, and she was like, yeah, do what you want. Find your way home. And I did most of the time. But today, would I say that to my kid? I mean, I think about what I do, and sometimes I'm like, I'm out of my mind. The fact that I have a 10-year-old and I'm driving her to gymnastics practice 4 days a week, picking her up some days at 9 o'clock at night. Like, what am I doing? If I had said that to my mom would have been like, that's lovely. Find your way home. Or you're not doing it, right? There was such a different lifestyle in America just 30, 40 years ago in how we raised our children to where it is today. It's a very hyper, like, helicopter parent-ish, like we're super involved in our kids' lives. And like I said, my parents were involved. They knew my teachers, they communicated with the school and things like that, but they were not nearly as involved as what today's parents are. So I think time is a big factor, but also you now have, a whole probably two generations of women who went to college, got degrees, got careers, and then kind of want to stay in those careers. Now, for me, when I had my first baby, I was graduating from law school. Crazy idea. We got married in October, and then I had to go to law school, go back to school, actually. We got married on a Friday, and I had to go back to school on Monday. So the plan was to have a honeymoon after I took the bar exam. Lo and behold, some 6 months later, I'm pregnant. So we had postponed our honeymoon for 5 years. But I distinctly remember being like, I want to stay home with my baby. I don't want to leave her when she was born. And so I worked part time for a couple of years after that. Um, and so it became, but I wanted to go back to work. I got a degree in law. I wanted to go and do the work. I got to do radio, and I loved my job, both my jobs. And I think a lot of women are in those positions too, where they're finding that, hey, I spent a lot of time getting this education, and I kind of want to do this. I kind of want to have a career, which makes it a lot more difficult to have, 3, 4, 5 kids like we used to do back in the day, when there is, I think, a large part of us that gets kind of, for me anyways, I was very torn, and I was like, there's only so many times that I can put a baby in daycare and cry for the first week. I can't do that forever. I'm sorry. I'm just not going to do it over and over again. So I think the time is a huge factor in this. It's a huge commitment. And the reality is that American families, the dynamic of American families has dramatically changed. You do have a lot more two-parent households where both parents are working. And they're not necessarily working out of necessity, but because both parents want to work. It's not just a job, it's a career. Now, that's not to say that there are a lot of cases, of course, where both parents have to work. But what I'm saying is that because we have given women so many opportunities to get a career, a lot of us went and got a career. And that makes it harder to have more babies. They're super time consuming. However, there are some folks who think or seem to think that this has more to do with race. Take a listen to this clip from The View.
In 2024, there was a 1% increase in U.S. births, but that increase was with Hispanic mothers and Asian mothers. So they don't seem to be concerned about that increase. They seem to be more concerned about a decrease in other populations.
It's almost impressive sometimes how wrong the ladies of The View are, especially Sunny Hostin. To be somebody so like she like she gets it really wrong sometimes. So no, I don't think this has anything to do with race. I can disagree with this proposal without having to bring race into it, and let me explain why. The proposal was a general $5,000 to every mom who has a baby. They didn't say every white mom. They didn't say every Hispanic mom, every Asian mom. They said every mom who has a baby. That was the initial proposal. So, sometimes I think that if the ladies of The View get so hyper focused on things like race that they miss what could have been a much broader discussion. Like, think about this. The real issue that we recognize is the fact that we are just not having babies at the same rate that we used to, and we're not having babies at a rate to replace our population. That's the real issue. You can do that one of two ways. You can replace our population one of two ways. You can either have more babies, or you can add immigration. That's the conversation that they should be having, because think about this. If the Trump administration is at the point where they're even out loud spitballing the idea of a $5,000 payment to have more babies, then what we're really talking about is we need more bodies in America. This whole discussion about bringing manufacturing back to America sounds great until you realize that there are about 485,000 open manufacturing jobs right now in America. Right now. Now, are those actually, factory jobs? Are there different levels to that? Of course there are. But the reality is that we have a very low unemployment rate in America. It's under 5%. And yet we do not have enough bodies to fill those roles. We don't have enough teachers. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough people in manufacturing, in landscaping, in carpentry. Every industry is saying we don't have enough workers, and we have a dramatically low unemployment rate. So that means we need more bodies. And the Trump administration, whether they're going about this the right or the wrong way, is right in recognizing that we need more human beings. So if the discussion was not about whatever the hell the ladies of The View want to talk about, but instead we could say, yeah, you could have more babies, or we could talk about immigration. And this brings me to my other point that as I said in the beginning, Donald Trump is not a Republican. He is a businessman who ran as a Republican, and he is motivated by two things: money and power. And so when it comes to immigration, I know his administration right now is really cracking down on illegal immigration. I do some immigration law, so I know this. It has the hours that I have been working in the last month are unsustainable because of these new policies. But I'll tell you this: if anybody is going to, I think, actually introduce real immigration reform, like comprehensive immigration reform, I believe it's going to be Donald Trump. And I believe that not because he is Donald Trump, a politician, but because he is Donald Trump, a businessman. So we haven't had real immigration reform in this country since 1986, since Ronald Reagan. And what happened in 86 was that, actually, let me back up. There are two components to immigration. One is that you have to secure the border. You have to slow or control the flow of entry into this country. But two, you also have to figure out what to do with the millions of people who are in this country undocumented, right? And that is just a fact. And the majority of Americans actually support people who are in this country and who have not committed any crimes, and who are, say, paying their taxes or doing a number of other things. The majority of Americans support them getting some sort of path to citizenship or legal status. So we recognize that that is the reality. What happened in 1986 is that Ronald Reagan took care of the first part. He allowed the people who came into the country undocumented to be given a pathway to citizenship. It was about almost 4 million people. What they didn't do was secure the border. Now, enter Donald Trump, right? Because what happened after that? Oh, we've had like a solid almost 40 years of politicians trying to fix the problem. Here's why politicians can't fix the problem. Because a Republican is going to go into the White House and they are going to look at this from a Republican lens. They're going to be concerned with their base. They're going to be concerned with their party principles, with, is this a Republican thing, right? George W. Bush, and then on the other hand, you've got Democrats, and they're going to do the exact same thing. They're going to come at this as a politician. You know who Donald Trump is? This is a man who has routinely gone against Republican Party lines because he's not really a Republican. He is a businessman. And like I keep saying, he is motivated by money and by power. And so he is the type of person that is going to walk into this situation and say, if I can get the two things that I need, if I can secure the border and deal with the people who are here undocumented, right? And that provides the labor force that he needs. He is the kind of person that would do it. And it wouldn't be because he's motivated by politics. It'd be because he is motivated by winning, by getting power, by, being successful. And sometimes that's what we actually need, as opposed to politicians who are just coming in here trying to do political things. So this conversation about a baby bonus, I think, is interesting, but more from the fact that we are recognizing that we do not have enough bodies. We don't have enough people in America. And also recognizing the fact that, like I said, the way that our families have, the family dynamics have changed is going to be very difficult to induce women, or to, no pun intended, but to try to convince women to have more babies. It is going to be, it's going to be difficult. And I think that if we all recognize the point is that we need more people in America, will open a broader conversation, or could open a broader conversation for something like immigration, for the necessity of immigration. Thanks for listening to Straight Talk with Yuripzy Morgan. We got some exciting stuff coming up, so make sure that you subscribe on our YouTube channel and invite your friends and family to do so too. You can also find us on iTunes and Spotify.